Okay. So, all right, here we are. We have a double Torah portion this coming Shabbat on the calendar, and the two Torah portions are Achrei Mot and Kedoshim. So the Torah portion begins on in Leviticus chapter 16, and Achrei Mot goes 16, 17, 18 of Leviticus, and then Kedoshim is chapter 19 and 20. So those are our two portions. And this is what's called, this is the heart of what's called the holiness code. Because the word Kedoshim, holy ones, is the name of the second of these two Torah portions. But the holiness is the overall theme in many, many different kinds of iterations and variations throughout these two Torah readings. And these two Torah readings are the heart of the Torah, right? If we think about the Torah as 5 books of Moses, and then Leviticus is the central book of the 5 books of Moses, the third book, 2 before, 2 after, and this is in the middle. And then these Torah portions are pretty much, I mean, they're a little skewed toward the ending, but they're pretty much the middle of the book of Leviticus. So this is it. This is like a crescendo dealing with the theme of holiness. And we've tried to, wrap our minds and hearts around this whole theme more than once. Just as a kind of an overview again, the Torah reading begins with a detailed description of the Yom Kippur ritual, as we have in our English comments at the bottom of the page. So it's a whole description of what the high priest has to do, and go here and then go there and then wash up here and then change your clothes here and then go this and then go that. It's a whole to do. And then chapter 17, we have some rules about limiting how we avail ourselves of sacrifices and of food in general. And it's a temple or a sanctuary oriented expansion of dietary rules. We're not allowed to eat stuff as a sacrifice anywhere except by the sanctuary. A big prohibition against eating blood. The blood is the life force. Ki adam hu hanefesh. And this is a reiteration going all the way back to the covenant that God makes with humanity after the flood. So this becomes a big item. And then chapter 18, the last chapter, is mostly having to do with sexual prohibitions having to do with sexual relations, mostly incest related prohibitions. The famous or infamous prohibition, as it's been understood for millennia, against same-sex sexual relations. And we've adopted a different meaning for our time and for our reading in our community. We put it in, see, that's, I don't have it in my own Eitz Chaim Chumash doesn't have it, but in Shul, we have it inserted into every Eitz Chaim Chumash, that we translate that verse differently. And then we have, after that, Kedoshim. And Kedoshim is full of many mitzvot, many rules and regulations that are all comprising a manual, so to speak, for how to live a holy life, mostly away from the sanctuary, mostly in our own everyday world, our own everyday interactions with other human beings. So there's this very strong complementarity between a very highly ritualized and religious kind of concept of holiness. That's the focus of the first of our Torah portions. And the second Torah portion, Kedoshim, which has that name, be holy, actually is a focus that has much more to do with human activities and relationships with God, relationships with each other, but starting and rooted in what is the human being's path to becoming holy, aside from doing the rituals in the temple and bringing sacrifices and so on. Even when it talks about sacrifices, it talks about the human experience of the sacrifice rather than the rituals, sacred, priestly or divine participation in the sacrifice. So, so those are the two sides of the holiness coin. In the second Torah reading, we have the famous, maybe one of the most famous statements that the Torah has given the world: love your neighbor, love your fellow as yourself. And this is couched explicitly as a component of what it means to try to be holy. So there's no distinction here that's being made between all that religious stuff and all that ethical, moral, social, even justice kinds of things. It's all holiness. It's all holiness all the way down. So that's sort of, and at the end of the Kedoshim, we have a review, a return to the question of forbidden sexual relationships, and the prohibition is in the first Torah reading, and the punishments are made explicit in the second Torah reading in Kedoshim. So that's pretty much it. That's pretty much the whole thing. And we have again a reiteration that kashrut is related to holiness also. So that happened in both of them. Okay. Anybody have a particular? Oh, before I even finish saying the words, we've got Sarita and Jennifer. Go ahead, Sarita.
So actually, you sort of landed on it. I was very interested in Kedoshim, chapter 19, verses 17 and 18. So that includes the love your fellow one, because
that's also mine.
Well, yeah.
So we're good.
Yeah,
that's exactly mine.
Yeah,
rigged. It's rigged. Something here was you.
We just don't like. We don't like to be commanded to not hate people.
Well, what really struck me about it is that these have to do not with action specifically, but with your feelings, right? And I think that's really interesting. They're much different, therefore, in character than so many of the other do's and don'ts that relates to things that you're supposed to do or not do, as opposed to what you're supposed to feel and not feel. So that's why those two particularly struck me. Those two.
Yeah, my evil cousin is evil. Like, if I want to have some hate on her, I mean, come on.
Whatever works for you. Whatever is good. The only thing is just sign up for the listening thing. That's all. That's the only thing we're compelling here. Everything else is on you. Okay, so without any objections from anybody else, the motion carries. And let's take a look at that. So the question actually will be where we would preferably start.
That's what I figured.
Yeah. So to tell you the truth, to give away a secret, this is part of what I chose for Torah reading for when I chant a few verses on Shabbat. So now you don't have to tune in this coming sharing Shabbat. We'll just take care of it here.
What page are we on?
So that's what I'm trying to figure out where we should start.
Okay.
Sarita and Jennifer are looking at verses 17 and 18.
That's 696.
And
Thank
that's
you.
on 696. I'm just thinking whether we should start a little bit before that. What the heck? Come on, let's start from the top of the page, from that beginning of that aliyah. Okay, so 696, this is, if you have some other edition, this is Leviticus chapter 19. Let's start from verse 15, okay? Okay, so you guys want to fight over who's going to read the text?
I'll read.
Thank you.
You shall not render an unfair decision. Do not favor the poor or show deference to the rich. Judge your kinsmen fairly. Do not deal basely with your countrymen. Do not profit by the blood of your fellow. I am the Lord. You shall not hate your kinsmen in your heart.
Kinsfolk.
Your kinsfolk, in your heart. Reprove your kinsman, but incur no guilt because of him. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against your countrymen. Love your fellow as yourself. I am the Lord.
Okay, so there's a lot here. And one thing that I want us to just pay attention to is when it seems to be talking about a lot of people and when it seems to be talking about one person, right? If we look at the beginning, it's not clear in the English, but the first verse is lo ta'asu. That's plural. So that means, hey, you all, don't do this, right? All of you together. And then the translation we have here is, do not, you, all of you, render an unfair decision. In the Hebrew, it's do not make, do, perform injustice in rendering justice. Mishpat, we've talked about many times. The word mishpatim is a word that we had in Exodus as a Torah reading name. So the word mishpat means fair judgment, and avel is a corruption. So do not produce a corruption in judgment. That would be another way of translating it. And plural you. Okay. So what would that sound like? Who would that be pointed at? Who would that be spoken to? Who's the audience?
That sounds like judges, people in
Right.
authority.
Yeah, it sounds like we're talking about the justice system per se. And even though individuals are in charge of this court or that court, it's a societal kind of charge, right? This is not the way it should be, right? So, okay. Then in the Hebrew, following the Hebrew again, it says, do not favor the poor and do not show deference for the rich. That happens to be written in single,
Singular.
right? Lo tisa, you shall not raise up the face of the needy, nor shall you glorify the face of the great, the grand. Okay, so if we want to take it with the context, with the lead-in phrase, this is sort of like getting directly at the judges, right? Each of the judges is maybe possibly being spoken to. And then again with the singular, betzedek tishpot amitecha, right? Judge your kinsman fairly or with justice, tzedek, right? Tzedek tirdof, right? Pursue justice. So when you render judgment, do it with justice. When you are judging and here the translation is kinsman, right? And amit, somebody who's part of your part of your collectivity, part of your people, right? When you're judging your people, judge them fairly, except it's in the single, one of the people from your people, a person from your people, right? That's a possible way of looking at it. So before we get into the other stuff like that we're supposed to eventually get to, what kinds of meanings can we elicit from this in terms of, I think that there's a social guidance, and then there's also a kind of a professional warning that's being given to those who are part of this system.
Well, it's interesting because if it starts with collectively, right? There's the collectively, don't render unfair decisions, but then it's each one of you. It needs a buy-in from every single one of you. It's not, don't just think of it as, some group thing. This is accomplished by each person. And it's kind of showing that you could be swayed in either direction, right? You might just think it means that you're going to show deference to the rich, but the opposite could happen also, where you bend over backward and therefore work against people just because they're not poor or something like that. So it's kind of interesting, pointing you in both directions.
Or bend over backwards to be nice to the poor person.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right? So how do we feel about that? How do we feel about this idea we shouldn't be extra nice to the needy? How do we react to that?
Well,
Yeah.
it's interesting because our system of justice is in theory based on this statement in America, although we fail really miserably.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear. Our system of justice.
That our system of justice in this country to me, is based on this very statement, or at least we try to go for what's being stated here, but that we fail. And I think that
you said before we fail
miserably. We really do. Because the rich really are favored in our criminal justice system, and the poor can't afford to defend themselves. It's just that basic. So the Torah is not addressing the issue of the money in our current system.
Well, it's trying to address it with words.
Yeah, with words. So I don't feel that poor people should be allowed to do that, illegal criminal things, and that they would not want people to think of them that way. And I've grown up being, my family has struggled, so we wouldn't want to be held to a lower standard. However, if you have no money for an attorney, you are inherently being mistreated by the system. So I just want to point that out, that you don't have a right to defend yourself. It's just the way it is.
Right. We should just take note that there are various, I'm not an expert on this by a long shot, there are various ways of organizing a justice system, and having it based, as we have it in this country, on antagonistic sides is not, and therefore you really need a good lawyer to fight your case, is not necessarily the only way to organize it. The Torah doesn't have anything about lawyers and stuff like that. It has this idea that there's a judge who supposedly, and that's part of this verse, is impartially listening to all sides, right? So theoretically, at least, you might be able to believe or convince yourself that having money or not having money shouldn't really affect the proceedings, right? It might affect somebody's prejudice, and that's part of what the Torah is saying. Don't be prejudiced for rich people or against rich people, or for poor people or against poor people. So getting back to, I just want to say for a second before Jen and anybody else wants to talk, what Sarita was saying about noticing that this is not about that the later one, love your neighbor as yourself, is not about doing something. It's about, or don't hate somebody. That's about emotions. We've already entered that gray area now, right? Because this is stuff that's really very hard to detect, prove. When you say somebody has acted, let's say, with some kind of prejudice, they might be absolutely outraged or even completely oblivious to what you're talking about. and not conscious. No, I'm not. I'm completely impartial. I just call him like I see him. Jen.
So I was trying to figure out, does this impartiality begin and end in not acting on any particular prejudice you have for or against the poor or for or against the rich? Or does it mean that you can't take into account Jean Valjean's circumstances when he, breaks a window, steals a loaf of bread to stop somebody from starving, his nephew, niece, whatever it was. So, I mean, where does this end? Where does it become relevant that, yes, you need to take into a much wider circumstance into account, and that circumstance might include, like, the person's poverty level.
Right. Just for a half a second, let's remind ourselves, we've seen this and heard this, I'm sure, many times. Let's go back to 694. So this is chapter 19 in Leviticus, verse 9.
When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap all the way to the edges of your field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. You shall not pick your vineyard there or gather the fallen fruit of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and the stranger. I, the Lord, am your God.
Okay, so this is leket shikha upeya. These are 3 gifts to the poor that are mandated by the Torah, and again, part of this holiness code. So here we have, I would suggest the Torah violating its own rule. The Torah says you're not allowed to steal, right? The Torah recognizes private property as a right. If I own something, I really own it. And I don't care if you're poor or not, you can't take what I have just because you're hungry. So yet what the Torah says in that verse 9 is that God says to the person who owns the field, I don't care that you own the field. I'm tilting in favor of poor people because there are a lot of poor people out there that don't have anything to eat. And I'm not even going to ask you to be nice to them. And
Oh no, we lost him.
He's frozen.
We didn't hear.
the title of the
Yeah, we lost you for a couple minutes.
yeah, I know, and then I have my little
There we went again.
Here you go again.
so the Torah says you may have title to this property, but there's something here that's overruling your own property rights, and that is there's a person here who's in dire need. So don't touch the corner of your field. It's not, why don't you harvest and then give 5% donations to the poor? Harvest all of what you have and then give a couple of boxes of produce to Tony's Kitchen. That's a beautiful mitzvah, but that's not what this mitzvah says. This mitzvah actually says it doesn't matter that you own it. The poor have a right to come in and satisfy their needs. So there is a recognition of a Jean Valjean kind of situation that is chronic and endemic to society, and the Torah takes certain steps to try to address that. And now it goes the other way. And it says, on the other hand, sort of what Audrey was saying before, just because you're poor doesn't give you the right to go out of the corner of the field and go into the middle of the field and take what you want. So there's a kind of a balancing act going on.
Yeah, but it sounds like then don't be poor in the city because, you need to be somewhere where there's a field that people are leaving food for you.
Well, so that's an excellent question also. And we know that that's the way, historically speaking, poverty is one of the great drivers of migration to population centers. It's definitely complicated. Is this trying to keep them back down on the farm? Or is this, just recognizing, given an agrarian society, we have to tell the farmers who have the most serious and, to pardon the pun, deeply rooted sense of owning their land, that it has to be, loosened up a little bit, and they're told, you know what, yes, you own your land, but not always. Yeah, David.
Um, at the risk of changing the subject a little bit, I see a subtext here, and that is that there are people who favor the rich and trot on the poor for self-aggrandizement. I'm thinking about a recent president, for instance, who looked the other way for his friends and was quite hard on the less fortunate. So I'm reading something else here. I don't know if it's been raised yet, but I would just mention it.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that that's a common prejudice. It has practical roots to it. Why be friendly with somebody who can't do anything for you if you can be friendly with somebody who can, help you out? So, there's definitely a self-interest issue, and then there's also a kind of a sense. It's in, I think it's Calvinism, to be, a little superficial and unfair to the Calvinists, maybe. But if you're rich, that means you're good. If you're poor, it means you're not good. If you're rich, God likes you. If you're poor, God doesn't like you. So if God doesn't like you, why should I like you? So yes, there are all kinds of ways of people developing biases and perspectives on other people based on their economic status. If you're poor, it's because you're lazy. So lazy people are have character flaws. They're bad people. I don't want to hang out with crummy people. Michael.
One thing that I hear in these lines is that you should at least be aware of your biases in your dealings with people on a personal basis, and that perhaps you need to be aware of societal biases, and systemic problems in dealing with segments of society.
Right. So yeah, this is a very, very important point that you're making.
I'm thinking about how hard all this is to balance. I mean, Jen brought up the whole point about do you take into account someone's circumstances or not? But I'm also thinking about, what about sort of societal history? That the poor, and certain groups have been disfavored over time. And now you're faced with a case and you decide that case, not just as the individual case, but as a case almost to redress that history of societal wrongdoing. But of course, that can disadvantage the person, the person involved in this immediate case. So I think that's really hard. It's a really hard balance to achieve.
And back to the attitude question. The phrase, the term that we have is affirmative action, right? We have this idea of lifting up the face of the needy, right? Bending over backwards to redress past wrongs by affirmative action, right? Going the extra mile to make sure that people who never had access, never had opportunities, should be given that opportunity now. I think that there's again, personally, I think that there's tremendous meaning in that. I think that judiciously, fairly applying that, however, whatever the heck that means, is really important. But you have somebody, for instance, on the Supreme Court, Clarence Thomas, who sees this as such a disrespectful attitude toward the poor, right? Oh, you don't believe we can actually succeed? You think we need that extra cheating in order to, advance ourselves? And, you get anecdotally, you get people who say, everybody who looked at me, I was at Harvard, I was a person of color. Nobody believed I was intelligent. They believed that I was there because I was given that extra, hand, that extra, leg up. So
Right, as opposed to being there because your father was there and gave a lot of money. I mean, I mean,
right.
there's an
No,
opposite
I'm
affirmative
not-
action going on.
I'm not excusing what they're saying, and I disagree with them in the end. But it is a burden that has to be carried, and it is we privileged folks, we get it. We're damned if we do, damned if we don't. Because and this is part of this. What Michael is saying, it's very hard to be aware of it. Is really important to really plumb what's going on inside. And I would suggest that that's part of this. It's not simply do this and you succeed in being more holy. Refrain from doing that and you succeed in being more holy. The holiness dimension, holiness is a very kind of intangible quality that we struggle with coming to grips with all the time. Here we're seeing that this is something you're having to measure yourself, judge yourself, look into your own heart. We'll get to that teaching a little bit more in a half a second. Let's go to the next verse, to 16, and we should make some time, yes, to get to 17 and 18. So now we have a funny translation, in my opinion. What's 16 say?
Do not deal basely with your countrymen. Do not profit by the blood of your fellow. I am the Lord.
Okay, so see comment to Exodus 23:1. That's what it says at the bottom at Halacha L'Maaseh. So I really didn't look. Sorry, I didn't do my homework. 23:1. 23:1 says, you must not carry false rumors. You shall not join hands with the guilty to act as a malicious witness. So it's very nice that they refer us to that, because that is the standard traditional translation that should apply here. This translation that they're offering is it says, it's like off base. Do not deal basely with your countrymen. That's not what everybody understands this to mean. What everybody understands this to mean usually is, except for Bible scholars that write, Eitz Chaim, is do not be a talebearer among your people. The word rachil is a rochel is a merchant. There's some place here somewhere that, do not deal basely. Literally, look at, it's okay. Look at the note above the line, 16, back on 696.
Literally, do not act as a merchant toward your own kinsmen. A traveling merchant has fairly easy access to secret information and gossip. Here, no one should traffic in such information.
Right. So why they choose to obfuscate that by putting in deal basely, I have no idea. But this actually follows directly from our understanding of the way we reinterpreted Tazria and Metzora, the whole Tzara thing about being a talebearer and circulating rumors, or did you hear what so-and-so, and violating people's privacy and so on. That's what this is usually understood to be saying. And the next part of it is also astounding to me, that this is the way they translate it. It says, do not profit by the blood of your fellow. They have a little note. Let's read that note.
This has been interpreted in various ways. The rendering that best fits the context is, do not pursue one's livelihood in a way that endangers another or at the expense of another's well-being. Okay,
so again, thank you for the note. How somebody would understand that from the verse, I don't know. But so don't exploit other people, right? Don't run a sweatshop. Don't run a factory with unsafe labor conditions, so that you make the profits based on their having to work to the point where they hurt themselves, where they get sick, and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, completely common in our society. But The literal words are, do not stand on the blood of your friend, your fellow. I am the Eternal. The way this is traditionally understood is, if you see somebody in trouble, do not stand back and refrain from helping them. If you can save somebody, that's their blood, don't just stand there while their blood is being spilt. If you have a phone that can take a video of a police officer murdering another person, then take your phone out and take a picture of what's happening. The rabbis say more. If you've got a gun, shoot that police officer before they murder the person that they're trying to kill. So that's the way the sages understood this. Don't be a bystander when your friend's blood is being spilt. So this is, again, it's written in the singular, right? But altogether in these two verses, we have stuff that's so relevant to the societal sickness that we are suffering from and that we're more and more aware of.
How do you see the two parts of that sentence as
So,
being-
right, or what's the connect? Is there a connective tissue that's going on from one clause to the next, from one verse to the next? Does anybody? It's it's a good question. What can we? Are these just distinct? Here's a list. Number 1, number 2, number 85, number 613. Or is there some connective tissue?
Are we still dealing with verse 16?
We're
Yeah,
talking about, yes, 15 and 16,
Okay,
and also 16, the two halves of 16.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Like, is that a continuous set of statements, or is that simply just, for convenience sake, they just got all listed together? I mean, I would say it's not the most, here, watch what I'm going to do now. This is going to sew everything together really tight, but in a loose way. In a loose way, this is about taking each person's humanity totally seriously. Right? This is about behaving and watching how you behave. And in each one of these cases, it's about, there's somebody opposite you. There's an other, right? There's another person, and you have some kind of power to affect that other person's life. Be super careful how you affect that other person's life. And in the case of verse 16, the way I'm reading it traditionally, this can be in the most subtle way, and this can be in the most blood-chilling way, right? So what if I say a little word or two about what my opinion of the way that person presents themselves or acts or whatever, right? A little lashon hara. So what? We all do it, right? That's the first half of the verse. No, you can destroy a person's life by the way you talk about that person. The second half of it is the person's blood is being spilt right there. What are you doing about it? Now, here there's another excuse, right? The other excuse is, I didn't spill that person's blood. I just minded my own business. I just didn't get into the line of fire of the person who's trying to shoot the other person. So what do you want me to do? Risk my own life? You can make a zillion excuses. Goes back, Michael, to what you were saying before. You have to look in your heart. What exactly is driving you or preventing you from acting? What's going on here? So that's what I would suggest as part of what's being unpacked in various ways, in various graphic ways. Yeah, David.
My reading of it gossip is being equated to assault. And so if your blood is shed, you've been assaulted. And gossip is just another way to assault. You hurt by physically shedding blood, and you hurt by gossiping.
So again, I want to emphasize the subtlety of the verse. In the second part of the verse, it's not that you're shedding the blood, it's that you're not stopping the shedding of blood, right? You're refraining from getting involved. The first half of the verse is you are getting involved. You're minding somebody else's business completely. You're judging that person, you're characterizing that person, you're labeling that person, you're taking advantage of that person, you know, in knowing something about them that you then spread, whether it's true or false. In the second part, you know, you're just standing by. And, you know, the what was it, Kitty Genovese situation? You know, you just, you know, you hear the cries and you just don't dial 911. I want to just bring in the last two words for a second. This is how the sages and the commentators read Ani Hashem. Why is that phrase concluding this verse and actually concludes sections? So we will get to 17 and 18 a little bit. Look at the end of 18. What is the end of 18? Read the whole of 18. What the heck?
You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against your countrymen. Love your fellow as yourself. I am the Lord.
So, right, or I am the eternal.
Right.
So I am the eternal, Ani Hashem. And in the end of 16, Ani Hashem. If you go back to verse 14, what's the ending?
Ani Hashem.
Ani
I am the
Hashem.
eternal.
If you go back to verse 12, what's the ending?
It says, I, the Lord, am your God. Ani
Ani Hashem.
Elohechem,
Right.
yeah.
And what about the end of verse 10?
10. I, the Lord, that's I, the Lord, am your God. Yeah.
Right. So that's Ani Hashem Elokeichem. And there are other places. If you go backwards, you'll see it again and
4
again.
also.
Right. So why is this the refrain for all of this stuff? Jen.
I always took it for a shorthand reminder that, you know, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt. Like, I'm the reason that you are free and are even contemplating making laws to live in your own land. So it's a shorthand for, you know, who's speaking and why you should pay attention.
Right. So that would emphasize God's authority, God's power, right? God's caring for justice, as you know, and that's why you should listen. But a lot of the commentators go in a different way. Yeah, Michael.
Aspiration.
I think it all relates back to the very first sentence in the Parsha. You know, you should be holy because I'm holy. Do, you know, be
Right.
like me.
It's
So then,
aspirational, right?
well, so be like God, right? So it would be shorthand then for not I am the Lord your God who took you out of Egypt, but I am the Lord your God who is holy.
Right.
So try to be like me. Right. So Ani, you know, He Kadosh, Ani Hashem Elokeichem. Right. So Ani Hashem is short maybe for that. Also good. A third way. Many commentators explain these are the these are the unknowables to other people. All of these mitzvot that are part of this holiness code, or the vast majority of them, are mitzvot that nobody knows whether you're really fulfilling them or not, except you and
God.
Ani Hashem. Nobody knows if you could have called 911. Oh, I didn't hear the shots ringing out. Right? Nobody knows that you didn't do that. Nobody knows whether you really had a prejudice for or against that poor person or that rich person when you render judgment. But if you search your heart, can you know that? And if you know, and you say, but nobody else will know, so that's okay. Ani Hashem, I do know. I will know whether you're being holy or not. So that's this kind of statement of not authority, but of deep, intimate truth. I'm the you know, the one that you're not going to be able to lie to, right? You're not going to be able to get away. You might even be able to lie to yourself. You'll never be able to fool me. Let's go to 17.
But I had one more comment about 16, in that, in some sense, 16 seems to be saying that you can do wrong by doing, but you can also do wrong by not doing.
Right.
So both of those is, again, just like in 15, it's really set up as these sort of opposite things for you to think about. And how do you straddle that? Yeah. How do you, yeah.
Okay, so now taking that
17.
principle that you just mentioned, let's read 17.
You shall not hate your kinsman in your heart, reprove your kinsman, but incur no guilt because of him.
Okay, so what does that mean now? Again, what's the connection between the two of them? Is there a connection? Let's take the, this, go ahead.
Well, hating is eternal, right? Reproving then is something that you do, right? So this is internal and external.
Right. So that's again, we get that play of inside outside. Also, if we think about reproving, about admonishing, right? Another word, right? But reprove is a good translation in this time. Let me give credit when credit is due. Here we finally actually have a good translation because it actually echoes in the Hebrew as well as in the English, this idea of proof. And again, this is single as opposed to the translation kinsfolk. No, it's actually single, your brother. Do not hate your brother in your heart.
Who's doing the hating? One person or multiple people?
One person. One person. But the danger when we reprove people is that reproval, admonition can very, very often either come out of hatred or engender hatred. Right? When a person starts dressing down somebody else, and if you really get into it, you end up tearing down that other person, and there's a great danger that you, in your righteous position, you know, or your sense of being wronged by this other person, can fall into then judging that other person as being, you know, the worst enemy of all goodness, or the scum of the earth, or any of that kind of stuff. So here it says, reprove your fellow, right? That's the amitecha, your friend, your fellow, but don't hate them in your heart. If we read it that way, then it's a coupling of internal feeling with action. The actions that you do have to be without malice, right? Yes, Audrey.
Is the word, the translation, is it actually guilt or hatred?
So that last phrase is really a difficult phrase. It says here, but incur no guilt because of him. The literal translation is, do not carry over him, upon him, raise up upon him, bear upon him guilt. And the way to translate that is again various. One way, simple way to translate it is, when you admonish the person, don't judge them as guilty. Just try to get them to do the right thing, but don't demonize them. Means don't make that person into the epitome of sin. Don't make them, so guilty for what they do that they, I don't mean feel guilty, but don't judge them to be so guilty that, that you decide that these people are evil incarnate. That would be
I
one
just
way.
have one thing that I know, Jen, is that when I behave that way, when I really am angry, I always end up feeling guilty.
So that's the other side of it.
Yeah.
Whose guilt are we? Who is the guilting that
Yeah.
are we guilting that person, or are we guilting ourselves? Right. So yeah, I mean, we can then, and that might be because deep in our heart we feel that maybe we overstepped the line. Right. But on the other hand, other people read this as don't stand by idly. When something is being said, raise your voice up, because otherwise you will be guilty. If that person is doing something wrong and you don't say, stop, that's wrong. And that can happen in an individual act, or can happen in a societal situation. If you don't raise your voice and say, no, this is absolutely wrong, then you will take upon yourself their guilt.
So does that mean that we have to argue with every crazy cousin we have on Facebook all the time when they say something terrible?
Excellent.
Are we allowed to just finally unfriend them and, walk away from it?
Yeah. So this is you must have missed that Talmud discussion that we had.
I'm sorry. I've had crazy family stuff going
Shame on you. That's
No.
terrible.
on.
Right. So good. I'm glad you left. So it's very, very tricky. And there's a lot of discussion about this, about how do you factor in principles with practicality? Do you fight to the death when you know you're going to lose, when it's a lost cause? Do you walk away? Last week I shared the Psalm, Mi ha'isha chafetz chaim. Who's the person who loves life? Sur me'ra v'aseh tov. Turn away from evil and do good. So sometimes turning away from evil doesn't mean just I want to do evil, but I won't. I'm going to turn away. Sometimes it means just walk away. Don't get involved, right? Because you're not going to be able to change it, and you're just not going to be able to fight on another day for when you can change it. So these are hard questions. Very, very, there's no, okay, let me give you the prescription. Here it is.
Well, does it still want us to regulate, even if it doesn't know whether we should be active or inactive at a particular moment? Does the Torah want us to regulate our emotions regarding the people who are putting us in a position to have to make these decisions?
Well, we say in the Psalms, Ohaveh every Friday night, Ohaveh Hashem sin ura. Lovers of God hate evil. So there's supposed to be actually a set of emotions that are triggered by when you confront things that are good and when you confront things that are bad. They're not supposed to be. What?
Sorry, that was reminding me that there's a Zohar study coming up.
Okay. Thanks for reminding me. That it's not a matter of indifference. One last thing. We're at the end of time. Some people read the beginning of verse 17. Do not hate your brother in your heart, but rather admonish them. In other words, why? So it's not just, it's in a very specific thing. Don't bear a grudge inside your heart about something that somebody did to you, and never tell them why you're so angry at them and why you've decided that they are totally untrustworthy and you want to break off your friendship or so on like that. And again, back to Jen's question, when is this appropriate? When is it not? But it actually is an action-oriented mitzvah, according to the way many commentators read it. Don't keep it inside. Don't hate your friend in your heart, but rather spit it out. What are you angry at them about? Did they do something wrong to you? Tell them. Now, that may not get them to apologize, but maybe it means that you've stood up for yourself, and maybe then you can sort of cathartically get rid of the poison, in your heart. So these are all various ways of trying to struggle with these messages, but a lot of it is, again, back to the heart. And the heart is the seat of holiness. All right.
All right.
See
Sign
everybody.
up for the
Thank you.
listening campaign.
Absolutely.